Hi everyone, this is Miss Braxton and I am coming at you with some notes on public opinion and political participation. The word of the day is going to be polls and polling. And so my hope and our hope is that these notes will help you as you're figuring out what the different kinds of polls are, as you're figuring out what this means for your project, because you do have a tab on polling. And so we're hoping that this will kind of help clear things up and serve as an additional resource for you outside of whatever your teacher has lectured until this point. So there's a video clip here. I'm not going to go over this video clip right now, but I do suggest that you watch it on your own. It has some really great examples of the pros and cons of public opinion polls, most of which we will actually be touching on in these notes, but go ahead and watch the video. It is someone talking who isn't me or your teacher, whoever that is. So first of all, what the heck is public opinion? Well, it's what the public thinks about an issue or a set of issues at any time. It is literally the opinion of the public. And so it is what it sounds like, which is always nice. How do we measure public opinion? Well, with public opinion polls. And so these are interviews or surveys with samples of citizens, hopefully a good sample, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But these polls are used to estimate the feelings and beliefs of the entire population. So again, you cannot really survey the entire United States at the same time. That's pretty much impossible. So we get a little swath of the public, hopefully not too little, but something that is representative of the public demographically. You want a big enough sample size for those of you guys who have taken any kind of stats classes, or I think they cover it sometimes in AP Psych as well. But you want to get a good sample so that you can ask them these questions. And then if your sample is good enough, you can pretty much multiply that and kind of apply it to the rest of the country to decide or to figure out how the country feels about a person or a topic or an issue. So there are several types of public opinion polls, all of which we are about to go through in detail. So a straw poll. This is an unscientific survey that's used to gauge public opinion on a variety of issues and policies. So if you have been paying attention to the news lately, you've probably been seeing, as it relates to the election, people being asked what is the most important issue for voters. And so here I have a screenshot from Pew Research Center, which is a very reputable pollster. And they asked in around between July 27th and August 2nd, they asked registered voters what the top issue was for them. And so you can imagine how this kind of information is really important to candidates, campaigns, and political parties, because what people care about is what you're going to talk about. And so you can see here, the economy was the #1 issue, but then you also have healthcare and Supreme Court appointments and the coronavirus. Those are all up there as well. So you may see people focusing more on these issues than on something, unfortunately, like climate change or a woman's right to choose, right? Which are kind of at the bottom of this list. So straw polling is really important to campaigns because that is going to kind of be their focus as time goes on. And as public opinion about these issues shifts, you might kind of see them shifting depending on what their strategy is. Tracking polls is another kind of poll. So this is a continuous survey that really allows a campaign or a news organization or a voter to kind of track the rise of support for a particular candidate over time. So the rise or the fall. You can see here that this is a tracking poll that started in March of 2020. So you can see over time how the popularity of either Joe Biden or Donald Trump has gone up or down in the past several months. This is a screen grab from 538, which is a really cool website to go to if you like looking at polls. We're going to explore that a little bit later today, but I just wanted to kind of show you a snapshot of this. And this is a national poll. You can see who's ahead in national polls, but you can also do this for individual states, which I suggest that you do for your swing state to see who was up. Who is currently up? Why are there certain gaps? Like right here, I'd be like, okay, well, what happened in like mid-April to make Biden's go down and Trump's go up? And then what happened here where there's this a little bit of a bigger gap, right? This is what people do when they analyze polls. The one thing about tracking polls is that if they would like to be super duper accurate, you'll actually ask the same people over time, right? It's not going to be, different groups of people because, they could have felt a certain way at a certain time. But, if you want a really accurate tracking poll, that's going to be a poll of the same people asked the same question over a period of months. And so there you have it with tracking polls. Exit polls. So you've probably seen exit polling if you have ever watched election night news coverage. So these are polls that are conducted as voters are leaving polling places. So it's like you went into your school or your church or your fire station or wherever you go to go vote, and you come out and somebody asks you who you voted for. That is an exit poll. And this is really what the media relies heavily on when they are trying to predict outcomes of the race. These are incredibly accurate because the people have already voted. So unless they're telling you a lie about who they just voted for, they're incredibly reliable. And exit polling is a lot of what you see if you're going to be watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC on the night of the election, right? Because you're not really getting real time results in a lot of cases that are as quick as exit polls are. Internet polls are another kind of poll that you actually may have taken yourself. So it is what it sounds like. Again, it's a survey conducted online of a particular sample of volunteers. And really, it is completely voluntary, right? You just see it kind of pop up. Maybe you're on foxnews.com and you see a poll. Maybe you follow Donald Trump and you see a poll on Twitter or something like that. You are opting in to take this poll whenever you want. And you can think about the ways in which internet polls might be problematic if you've ever taken one. I am guilty. When I was in high school, I would take multiple internet polls the same time over and over again to try to get a certain result. But internet polls are a different kind of poll, much less reliable, but a poll all the same. Push polling we're going to look at in depth in just a second, but push polling is a poll that is truly meant to push the respondent in a particular direction. Sometimes it's going to include information in the question itself that's going to make an opponent sound really terrible. So it's going to push the respondent into voting a certain way, or not voting a certain way, but answering the poll in a certain way to get a particular response. Sometimes it's even just polling that is not even really trying to get an accurate answer. It's just trying to plant a seed in the respondent's mind to make them think about their opponent in a certain way so that when they actually go to the polls, they're going to be thinking about this push poll and that information that was really damaging in the push poll that might push somebody towards a certain answer or towards a certain candidate or away from another one. So again, they're misleading. Sometimes they're even false questions that are meant to make a candidate come across in a negative way. So if we were in class, you guys would be doing this part. And if you're watching this in class, or if you're watching this before class happens, maybe like skip ahead a little bit and wait till class so that you're not coming with information that everyone else doesn't have. But if we were in class, we would kind of do this little pair deck asking about what kind of poll do you think is the most accurate? And I'm going to tell you now, again, fast forward if you were watching this before class, but the most accurate kind of poll is a exit poll or an exit poll. So exit polls are, again, extremely accurate. Some of the problems with polling is that, if I take a poll in June and saying, yeah, I'm going to show up in November and I'm going to vote for XYZ, but I never actually show up, then my response doesn't mean anything. So exit polls, you are not getting likely voters, you're not getting registered voters, you are getting people who actually voted. So you've already kind of eliminated that error. And you are, these people haven't changed their minds, right? Because in June, if I say, yeah, I'm gonna vote for XYZ, maybe something happens in October, and I change my mind, then again, that poll from June is completely inaccurate. But these are people who have already voted. They cannot go back. They can't change their minds. So they're pretty reliable. As long as people are being truthful about what they did in that voting booth, then you're getting pretty darn accurate results. When it comes to the least accurate, a lot of people think that it's push polling, but this is actually internet polls. And for this reason, Think about the fact that there is nothing stopping somebody from doing, in a lot of cases, they do have safeguards, but in most cases, they're not tracking IP addresses. These aren't like super secure polls where, there's something that, you can vote 1,000 times in an internet poll and you're one person and you're voting 1,000 times. So it's greatly skewed. You get a lot of trolls on the internet who are just messing with things, voting certain ways or answering a poll a certain way just because they have nothing better to do. You also have a very select group of respondents, right? First of all, it's on the internet, so you are only getting, not only, but you're only getting, well, literally, you're only getting people who are on the internet, right? And so people who are on the internet are disproportionately young. Young voters are the least likely to turn out, so that's not really that helpful. On top of the fact that, depending on the website that you're getting the poll from, that's going to be a very particular audience. The kind of polls and the kind of audience that is answering the polls that you're going to get on foxnews.com versus msnbc.com, totally different, totally unreliable, and not representative of the actual public at large. So internet polls are, in fact, the least accurate kinds of polls. So there's some problems with public opinion, right? There's some problems with polling, and we're going to talk about some of them. So the first one is biased questions. We're going to talk about that in just a second. You're going to see some examples of both biased questions and push polling, so hold off on that. We've talked a little bit about sampling error, right? When you are giving a poll, you want to give a poll that is as close to the actual electorate as you are going to get. Sampling error, a lot of people argue that that is one of the reasons why, people were so shocked when Hillary Clinton lost. We're going to talk about that in just a second, polls there. But, a part of the issue is that a lot of the pollsters over asked people with a college degree. So people who have college degrees are typically vote Democratic. And, so when you ask too many people in a certain population, it skews your results. And so that was what a lot of researchers had found, is that they were over polling college educated people and under polling those with a high school diploma or less. So sampling error, both in terms of who you're asking and sample size, right? A group of 50 people is not going to be as representative of the entire country as a group of 50,000 people if you're able to poll that many, which is actually a lot for a poll. But sampling error is definitely to blame for why some polls can be inaccurate. Bandwagon effect. So this is the idea that, you're turning on the news, you're looking and you're like, like right now, Joe Biden's up. Okay, I'm not really following politics that much. Joe Biden's up, whatever. I guess I'm just going to vote for Joe Biden because everybody else is voting for Joe Biden. Or, I'm looking at this straw poll and it says, wow, the economy is a really big deal. Maybe I should care more about the economy. Okay, I'll say that the economy matters to me, right? There's a bandwagon effect, and then there's the underdog effect, which is the complete opposite, where you're saying, oh, Joe Biden's up, well, Donald Trump, poor guy, I'm going to vote for the underdog. I don't care, as much, I don't feel strongly one way or another, but I just like seeing the underdog win. I feel like this happens every Super Bowl. Also, you can see polling about the Super Bowl. If it's like the Patriots and anyone else, everybody just wants whoever's not the Patriots to win. Underdog effect. You've seen this before. The key point is that all polls are biased, but they can still be useful. So even though these issues exist, polling is such a huge part of running a campaign and of being, informed about what exactly is going on, especially if you are trying to be elected. You really depend on public opinion polling. So let's talk now for a second about push polling. These are some examples of what push polls might look like. So in 2000, this is the South Carolina Republican primary. That means that Republicans were running against each other to be the nominee. So here's a question. Would you be more or less likely to vote for John McCain if you knew he'd fathered an illegitimate black child? Now, John McCain did not father an illegitimate black child. You can think about the wording here, like the illegitimate and the black part might turn off some people, some Republican voters in South Carolina who may have more problematic views around race, who are more socially conservative, who would not want to see somebody father somebody who is illegitimate, right? And none of that is true. But now you're thinking about it, so you're possibly, gonna go to the polls and then think, holy cow, John McCain and that illegitimate black child, I don't know if I should really vote for him, right? That is an example of a push poll, right? I don't think they really care about your answer. It's just planting that seed in your mind. In 2008, the presidential election, would you, if you knew that Barack Obama was supported by Hamas, a terrorist organization, would it change your vote? He's not supported by Hamas, but hey, the guy's last name is Obama and he's black, and maybe people are not, as well versed in, if you don't know who he is very much, and if you have some problematic views around race or around religion, then that could be a real push pull. It is a real push pull, but that could be something that really pushes you away from Obama, depending on how much you know about Hamas and how much you know about Barack Obama as a person. And then finally, another presidential election push poll, this time against Mitt Romney, who was a Mormon. How can you support a Mormon, quote unquote, who does not believe in Jesus Christ? Now, if you are a Mormon, or if you know anything about the Mormon religion, you know that they do believe in Jesus Christ. But a lot of people don't know very much about Mormons. And so this is a way to kind of, plant these really, really problematic, sometimes they're xenophobic, sometimes they're racist. They're playing on all of those fears in push polling to sway, in many cases, a very uneducated electorate away or towards a certain answer, a certain candidate, a certain idea. Here's a question bias example. So, depending on how much information and what kinds of information you want to give, that can make people answer very differently. So it's the same question worded two different ways. So when asked, should money, so this is like a government surplus means that there's extra money and the government wants to spend it on something because there's just a little bit more money. So in 2000, this is asking, should the money, the extra money from the government surplus, be used for a tax cut, or should it be used to fund new government programs? When asked that way, 60% of respondents said tax cut and only 25% said spending. But when asked, should the money be used for a tax cut, or should it be spent on programs for education, the environment, healthcare, crime fighting, and military defense? Whoa, look at that difference, right? More than the number that said tax cut actually then responded that they would rather see it spent on spending. So you can see how question bias, just the way that a question is worded seemingly innocuously, could really lead to vastly different answers of a question. And, to really put this into perspective for those of you who have been voting or who are planning on voting, there's an amendment on the Virginia ballot. So there's an amendment, question number 1 is asking, should the Virginia Constitution be amended? And this is a question, you can pause me for a second to read this. So go ahead and pause it. Okay, we're back. So this question looks pretty fair, right? However, Democrats in Virginia actually sued to edit this ballot question because it leaves out so much, and it kind of has this idea that you already know how district drawing works. So in the state of Virginia, every 10 years, census years, you have the districts of Virginia redrawn. And so typically it is the House, the House of Delegates in Virginia it's the General Assembly who draws the lines. It's the entire General Assembly who draws the lines. And whoever's in charge of the Assembly, the General Assembly, gets to redraw the lines. So the last time this happened in 2010, Republicans had control of the General Assembly. They drew the district lines in order to favor themselves. Now, Democrats have the control of the General Assembly, and they're saying that if we keep it without the amendment, then Democrats will be able to draw the lines of the district to be able to favor themselves. This amendment is basically getting rid of that, but it does a lot of things in the process. So it takes the number of people, for example, drawing the lines from 141 to 16. So if you didn't know that, then you might not know that now you're going from 141 elected people to 16 people, half of whom are appointed, right? It doesn't really say how those people are going to be appointed. So, Democrats really kind of pushed back on this and wanted the wording to be different because it seems like it's kind of the wording seems very fair, but doesn't kind of, in their opinion, talk about the lack of democraticness, small d democracy, that this is going to lead to. So you see that this is a real problem that occurs. They sued, they lost. But you can see that it looks pretty fairly worded, but it just doesn't really mention, like, by the way, it's now 16 people instead of 141 people who are deciding this. So, just an example of modern day question bias. And then if you look at something like, the polls, another thing to always keep in mind is margin of error. So you can really see here, if you just pause and take a second, people were so critical of the polls and in 2016. And the reality was that all of the polls were within margin of error. Normally the margin of error is about 5 points. And so the polls really weren't that off. And we have gotten so much better at polling as a result of the 2016 election, really making sure that we are, like I said, capturing who's actually going to be voting, making sure that certain voting populations are not overrepresented. And I want to encourage you to explore the Virginia polls. So this is going to take you to 538. You can see who's ahead in Virginia. This is a nice tracking poll that kind of shows you the difference here. I love 538 because it also tells you, it grades each pollster by how accurate they are. You can kind of filter by that. It also tells you who is likely to show up. So for example, who was polled, I'm sorry. So if it's just an A, that's just adults. You don't know if they're registered. You don't know if they're actually going to vote. The next highest is registered voters. That's pretty reliable, right? I mean, to some point, registered voters, you think they're going to actually, they're registered to vote. So they're not just, saying that they're going to vote and then they're not even registered. You have actual voters and then likely voters. So it tells you what the sample size was. For example, in this one, 796 people were polled and they were all likely voters. This one here, you might think is maybe a little bit more accurate. That's 1,148 likely voters. So you can see exactly how all of these polls are shaking out. You can do the presidential election, you can do the Senate election and see what those polls are looking like. So it's really interesting to look at and, always pay attention to the date. Is this a recent poll? When was the poll actually taken? Looking at those grades, looking at the sample size and who was a part of the sample is all really important. So definitely explore those polls. You can look at Virginia, you can look at your swing state, but just know that polls, they're not perfect, but they help us a lot. And if you ever get into politics, you're going to be looking at some polls. So enjoy.